Hey everybody, happy Friday and welcome to the Standard Studios. I'm Annie Gauss, Senior Political Editor at the San Francisco Standard, and I'm here with my crew, Joe Fitz, Gabriel Gresh. His first few days in office and what we know so far and what they tell us about what the next 4 years could bring. As always, we'd love to take your questions. If you have some, drop them in the Q&A box in the chat, or you can also try us on Twitter, and we'll get to as many as we can. So we have seen about 9 days of Mayor Lurie so far, and the first of those days was a big inauguration celebration.
Yeah, for Lurie, that speech seemed to be, a bit of a step up, but I gotta say, still not quite the soaring rhetoric of some of his predecessors. That was what initially struck me. Like, good for Lurie, not quite tops.
Yeah. He did reiterate, a lot of the rhetoric we saw in the campaign about accountability and change. A bit of change just in these first few days, but what about you, Gabe? What jumped out at you?
A sheriff, or the sheriff in City Hall. So I thought that was kind of interesting, seeing him now slowly kind of become.
From Gabe, you wrote a power play item in our newsletter, Power Play, about the lovely mugs that were given out.
I want to say the napkins that were handed out.
Well, you got to have that. Day one, I guess that was day one last Wednesday, but the first press release we got from Lurie's office was about the hiring freeze.
It was about
freeze,
the hiring
that's right?
freeze. Yeah, it was on Thursday.
Yeah.
So they're trying to programming and don't know what the criteria are for pausing certain contracts or programming. I mean, I think the press release was 200 words total or 300 words total. So I think there are a lot of people really wondering, and hungry for more details on that slowdown.
And we should probably note that the reason for the hiring freeze, right, is our big budget crisis. $876 million over a 2-year period, and last year's budget by former Mayor London Breed plugged with a lot of one-time uses. This is from the City Controller's Office itself in their own report. Essentially, the budget's being held up with bubble gum and shoestrings.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of speculation that this is kind of the year. We've been hearing about this budget crisis for years now, since the pandemic hit, and in some ways even before that. But it seems like this is kind of the year when things are really going to hit the fan,
Yeah.
in a way that we haven't experienced so far, because we've had that federal money that has kind of still been helping to prop us
Well,
up.
right, and the way people talk about it, the language they use is, oh, now we're going to finally see this, perhaps finally see the structural changes the city needs to make in order to spend less based on the reduced taxes we're getting in. But of course, what structural change means is shrinking. That's what it means.
Yeah.
And I think also, just adding on one more thing to what you said, is former Mayor London Breed was already kind of going in this direction of austerity measures. She had directed departments to make 15% cuts in the upcoming budget. She also had lightly suggested, hey, we might want to do a hiring freeze. So certainly Daniel Lurie took, suggestions from the former mayor and, progressed on them.
Yeah, and you wrote a great story about some of the reactions to the unions in the city who may be impacted by this hiring freeze. Tell us a little bit about what the response has been. Of course, these unions, many of which have a lot of influence on city government.
Yeah, definitely. So the unions are pretty pissed off. That's like the best way to put it. On Wednesday, they convened an emergency meeting to discuss how they are going to respond to this. I was on the phone with the head of SEIU, the executive director of SEIU, David Canham, expecting him to sort of be like, we're going to wait and see how it is. No, he was like, we don't have any answers on this. We're worried how it's going to affect our members. So I think that if there is going to be some sort of kind of first battle for Lurie, it seems like this is like potentially shaping up to be the one. However, I also spoke to a couple other union members who it kind of, I think, sounds like they would just want to like make this whole thing work out. Like, I don't really know if they're like in the mood to fight that much. And I think like one of the other union members I spoke with who went on the record was saying like, hey, look, like, I'm really not happy with the way this hiring freeze happened. And I'm still wanting answers, but like we all want this city to do well. He said to me, if both of us can make this city work together and he meant he and Daniel Lurie, like we'll work with him. And so I think sounds like there's a little bit of an internal debate within the unions right now over whether to fight or whether just to kind of keep it cordial, not come out instantly with guns a-blazing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and speaking of the budget, that is in some ways going to be likely to be the first major challenge that Lurie is going to have to deal with, and that's coming up quickly. And Fitz, you wrote an interesting item in our newsletter the other day about how he's actually kind of kept the budget infrastructure intact from Breed. Talk about that and why that might have made sense for him.
Yeah, I mean, getting real weedy, he kept the mayor's budget staff in place, which makes sense because we're going into a big budget season. There's the threat of Trump clawing back federal dollars that are owed to the city, hundreds of millions of dollars. So you wouldn't necessarily want someone too new with their hand at the till in this really crucial, critical time with a very short window. So while that's going on, I know that the mayor's office issued budget instructions, as you said, saying, hey, everything Breed said, just keep that going. And we're going to have some more instructions for you on top of that soon. So not much of a change. But the biggest piece in there is that the directions that Breed gave on nonprofits, which is to begin prioritizing nonprofits that have measurable outcomes. Well, how much in that $1 billion plus that the city spends on nonprofits every year have measurable outcomes? How much of them are outreach? And you really can't measure an outcome so much as you can say, yeah, we reached several hundred or several thousand people with this, campaign. But we don't know whether that got people to get vaccinated or got people to decide to, recycle, whatever the heck it might be. So those nonprofits right now are getting ready for essentially a bloodbath.
Yeah.
I do think, maybe for the nonprofit parts that will have real political consequences, right? Because some of those nonprofits are really politically active, and that might have, some political fallout if some of them didn't get their contract. And of course, the service is being cut, that will impact a lot of community members too, right?
And we see this every year, right? We see the nonprofits come to the Board of Supervisors for what we call add backs, which is when the supervisors kind of add back into the budget some things that the mayor's office cut. And there's always this push and pull between the mayor and the board over that particular slice of the budget. But if this new directive on nonprofits stands, can imagine that this will get much larger than usual.
Yeah. I mean, do we have a sense of how that process of assessment is actually going to work? Because, and we've written a lot about this in the past, but the city contracts with thousands of nonprofits and, and gives out over $1 billion a year. And we also don't necessarily have the best tracking system for, assessing the performance and things like that, and just even things as simple as ensuring that they're in compliance with the state we've seen in the past. So how is that logistically going to work?
Yeah, I mean, some of this work started last year under directive from Catherine Stephanie, who the former supervisor, now assembly member, who wanted more accountability for nonprofits, right? And while some of that work has started, to my understanding from insiders I'm speaking to, there's still an element of we'll know it when we see it, and it's a little open to debate. So that's going to be the focal point of discussions, I think, moving forward.
And I think it's also important to mention, too, that nonprofits are already to a certain extent, assessed in this city, right? Like they have to fill out. I'm not familiar with exactly how each department does it and what it looks like, but I've reviewed documents that show nonprofits filling out, this is what we do, this is how many people we serve. Like this is something that happens. I think we'll just have to wait and see how Lurie makes the determination of this is what we want, this is what we don't want. So
and I did talk to one of a major nonprofit director before. She told me actually the city's paperwork, bureaucratic system is already very, very big. Like there's a lot of paperwork they have to do. Like 10%, 20% of their personnel or time has to, be in those paperwork. And now if we have another layer to assess them, evaluate them, that might, add another extra work for them. Yeah.
Right, and not a lot of these nonprofits have that infrastructure. That all of a sudden starts seeing what nonprofits have the ability to fill that out or not. I mean, you could say a lot about the Dreamkeeper and the way people misuse funds, yes, but also in that mix were groups that were so small and didn't know how to handle just getting a huge amount of money dumped on them. They just didn't have the infrastructure.
Let's talk about some of these new hires that the mayor's office has made, because one of the first things that he announced, Mayor Lurie announced, is that he was installing these policy chiefs, which is something that kind of harkens back to an old system that we had of deputy mayors, but this is a system that we didn't have under the former mayor, where there are policy chiefs that are in charge of or collaborate with departments on certain aspects. We have a health and homelessness, public safety, and so on. What role? Well, first of all, who are these folks, and what role are they going to play, and what do we expect to see? Because some of these aren't, typical bureaucrats.
Right. So
there are four.
There's four of these, and let me just start with Alicia John Baptiste, because a reaction I've gotten when asking people, what they think about the four policy chiefs, always starts and ends with glow for Alicia John Baptiste. Just the amount of expertise she brings.
Well, tell us who she is.
She comes. I'm getting there. She's from Spur, but she also spent a long time in different city departments around transit and urban planning, and so she has this long history with all these folks. But not only with that, but this expertise in this field. So when we're talking about is Daniel Lurie surrounding himself with the best and the brightest, she's the one I think people point to the most when they go, "That's a good pick. She's going to make some great choices."
Yes, and she is the policy chief in charge of transportation, mobility, infrastructure.
Right. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So then we got Ned Siegel, that's in charge of the city's economy, kind of housing. We have Kunal Modi, who's in charge of health. And then we have Paul Yep, who's the public safety chief. I think, folks I've spoken to have talked about kind of the pros and cons of this new restructuring. On the one hand, like it used to just be the chief of staff giving advice to the mayor. Now you have not only the chief of staff, but also these 4 people giving advice to the mayor. So, it kind of lessens like the load on this one chief of staff, and you get a more diverse set of perspectives. But also then you're like hearing all these different perspectives, and that can like be a lot for someone who has never had political experience too, right? Like getting so many different perspectives, and having to kind of sort out through all of those. So I think like, it's not uncommon for, I think it was Bill Clinton who ended up like reshuffling like the way his presidential cabinet was structured halfway through. And so it's not like if Lurie finds this isn't working for him, he'll probably just reformat it. But yeah, one other observation that we've all kind of noticed is there are some people here from the private sector. So we have Ned Siegel, Kunal Modi. So Ned Siegel, ex-Twitter person, Kunal Modi from McKinsey. And so that also kind of presents some interesting questions of, okay, what are they bringing to the table from their perspective? What kind of clash will they have with the city's bureaucracy? Do they understand the city's bureaucracy? How will they try to change it? Are all kind of interesting things that I think we're going to see in the next few weeks.
Yeah, I was at a panel around Lurie just the day before he was inaugurated, and some of the people in the audience were like clearly concerned that this fellow from McKinsey, that McKinsey itself is had to pay out a huge settlement over essentially, I think, quote unquote turbocharging the opioid crisis through their advice to pharmacies and pharmaceutical industry. Like that's a bit of a wild place to come from, to all of a sudden be in charge of solving that crisis here.
Right. And McKinsey, for those who don't know, is a global consulting firm, and they're known for kind of coming into organizations, corporations, even governments, and kind of figuring out ways to drive efficiencies for better or for worse in the case of the opioid crisis.
Right.
So you could see how that type of perspective might be a benefit to the city in some ways, but you could also imagine there being, some clashes, with that point of view and people who have been part of government for a long time. We will see how it all plays out. But and Ned Siegel as well. He was a ex-Twitter CFO, worked for Goldman Sachs, comes from a kind of a high finance background. We'll see how those perspectives meld in the next few weeks.
I think one big difference from Mayor Breed's mayor's office and also Daniel Lurie's office is he kind of split the chief of staff into these policy chiefs, right? And also kind of eliminate all those policy advisor positions, because back in Mayor Breed's time, she has like transportation advisor, environment advisor, while she has a whole department of transportation environment, right? And Daniel Lurie basically eliminate all those positions and have these policy chiefs, and we have 52 department head. So all those 52 department head will report to all this policy chiefs. So it's kind of getting some of the responsibility from those chief of staff and deputy chief of staff. And I don't know how they meet every day, all of them meet, or, the policy chief will meet with department head, or, I don't know how that would work, but, maybe they have their own way working out right now.
Yeah. And adding on to what you're saying, Han, I think one thing that could certainly be a real positive of this restructuring is that now you have these 4 people overseeing departments that I've heard horrendous stories of departments not talking to each other on issues, and they're both working on a same project, and then they find out that they're overlapping on something, so it is kind of amazing that this wasn't the case before, and I think we can all agree that it's good to have better communication between these 56 agencies that have all kind of been doing their own thing for a while. So
kind of hearkening back to the time of Mayor Dianne Feinstein, right? She was famous for getting all the heads together and really grilling everyone on what they're working on. So kind of a bit of a return to form for the mayor's office.
Yeah, I think she's kind of he sort of looks up to her, hasn't he said that in the past?
Yeah, totally.
Where Feinstein is one of his models.
And that makes a lot of sense because he's certainly modeling some of his early moves on her.
And sometimes I'm wondering, all these policy chiefs, are they really have the real power, or are they just like a liaison between the mayor and the department, right? So let's talk about like chief of public safety. Is he really higher than the police chief, in charge of the public safety in this town, or it's more like a liaison of telling, okay, what's going on, like, and also the same apply to DPH or MTA, right?
Oh, you're so right. And think of politics. There's a politics of a mayor's office too, right? Who has the mayor's ear? And if someone's angry with one of those policy chiefs, do they circumvent that chief and go to a different chief? What about those issues that overlap, like fentanyl, where there's different policy chiefs with different slices of different departments that are all tackling it? Who is the point person in that? And how many times do they get end run around when there's a disagreement? And does that create more chaos than it's worth?
Right, because the policy chiefs they're not like supervising the departments. They're not in charge. They're sort of
liaison.
They're sort of there to articulate the mayor's vision in a way and sort of be an interface, right? I mean, they don't have like actual power.
Right, it's in the name, right? Policy.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Same as the board of supervisors of the mayor. I can't tell you how many people I talk to in just everyday life when I talk to them about politics who think the board of supervisors can like essentially like command the police staff, and it's like that doesn't really work like that.
Yeah.
It's not quite the structure.
So department heads, we've seen 2 recent departures. Just 2, or am I forgetting one? Just 2. It's not totally unusual for department heads to turnover, when a new mayor is elected. But, the 2 that have left are 2 of the most high profile, and that's Jeff Tumlin of the SFMTA and Grant Colfax of DPH, both of whom were in their jobs for a few years. Do we think this has something to do with Lurie specifically, or is this just kind of natural turnover?
It could always be a little bit of both, but certainly these are places where Lurie has articulated a vision, especially around fentanyl. So it makes sense that he wants to shape the Department of Public Health into what he wants. There's a lot of discussion about, just to jump into the deep end of the pool, harm reduction, which is, where a use of drugs can kind of continue while folks receive treatment and care, and that being called a failure repeatedly on the campaign trail. Breed, Farrell, and Lurie all taking shots at it at some point, or at least being cool to harm reduction. So, did Grant Colfax read the tea leaves and go, this is going to go in a direction I don't think is the way I want, so I'm out? Hard to know, but possibility.
Yeah,
I think it's fair to say every mayor wants their own, public health chief, MTA chief, police chief, right? So I think it's normal that we have this kind of a turnover. But specifically, I cover the Tumlin stepping down, right? But before that, we kind of hear a lot of rumors. He might extend for 6 months, stay, and then until they find a permanent chief. But at the end, he would just step down. And I think that might have some politics behind that, right? Because back in Mayor Breed's time, all the urbanists or bicyclists, they are considered being appointed to a lot of powerful positions, including Tumlin himself, right? But during the last election, we can see the city's political trend about transportation seems to be, a little bit backward to car-centric, or the narrative is a little bit more like, divided between the car and the bicycle. So Tumlin will be the first one, probably the target that Daniel Lurie wants to change to.
Yeah, it seems like the urbanists put a big bet on Breed, and a lot of the people who work behind the scenes on behalf of issues around building more dense housing and building more bike lanes and having more robust transit, those folks back Breed, and those folks also were really heavily in on Prop K, the Great Highway Measure, and that was incredibly politically divisive and arguably cost moderate Democrats a bit in the election, including on the Board of Supervisors. So folks who were backing Prop K are not exactly in the greatest of graces with this administration, I would imagine.
Yeah. I mean, his appointment of, the former head of Spur would seem to indicate a friendliness towards the urbanist perspective, but then, of course, during the campaign, Lurie was against Prop K, and so it's kind of unclear where he personally sits on some of these transportation issues, but we'll see.
Yeah, also I was speaking with someone a couple days ago in the transportation area, and they were saying that and I'm forgetting her name, but the woman right now who is currently the interim head.
Julie
of-
Kirschbaum.
Yeah, is like apparently very beloved within the department, and also comes from like that kind of urbanist perspective. And it sounds like apparently within the department there's like a want for her to actually be the one that takes over. But and I don't know what her position was on Prop K and some of these other things, if it would come into conflict with Lurie, but that'll be interesting to see it'd be the commission who ends up putting up a candidate.
I think Julie would be a pick that would get a lot of backing within the MTA proper. Back when I was a transit reporter, I frequently spoke to Julie and a lot of frontline staff, and it was interesting that you could get some people in MTA have the love of like muni operators and engineers, while as the planners don't get them. And some people are cool with the urbanists and the planners, but they don't know how to talk to the frontline engineers and blue collar worker staff. Julie straddles both those worlds very easily, so I think she would get a lot of support from the broader swath of MTA.
I think it would be interesting to look at how Daniel Lurie balanced the transportation topic, right? All the politics behind it, because he was supported by a lot of West Side voters, as we can see from the result. And the West Side voters are, heavily no on K, right? But in reality, the city has to move forward with all those more environmentally friendly, infrastructure, construction, or, bike lanes or everything, right? So he has to kind of respect that too. And also, those advocacy bicyclists are very strong in the city too, right? So how can he balance that would be very interesting.
And do we have a sense of what direction he wants to go in public health? I believe that's a position where the commission is going to select candidates. Am I
Yes.
right? Okay. It was interesting on the harm reduction point. I was looking through mayoral transition documents that each of the departments prepared, and in DPH, I noticed that harm reduction wasn't really discussed. And so, is that a reflection of the way that views have gone? I don't know, but it does seem like they may have to respond to Daniel Lurie's focus on fentanyl, perhaps even more than we saw with Breed, because that was a huge focus of his campaign and the subject of his first piece of legislation. Do you want to tell us about that?
Oh yes, the fentanyl emergency legislation, and I think you're right when it comes to the department. By the way, even departments who say that they base everything on science, they have to bend to the whim of politics sometimes. What is possible? What will the elected leaders actually fund of what we want to do? I think you're very right. So this week, Lurie introduced his emergency fentanyl declaration that is not quite an emergency fentanyl declaration, as we all know, because legally he cannot declare that. Now, if I walk down the street and I said, Lurie is doing something about the fentanyl, but it's not quite an emergency declaration, would the person on the street give a damn? Probably not, but it is kind of funny to us that this is one of the things that you encounter when you are a little bit new to politics and you're a little bit new to things. You want to do things, damn it, and then you run into this idea of, this may not actually be legal.
There's an actual legal definition of emergency that you can't.
It has to be like something that's like a critical, unforeseen situation.
Sudden, unforeseen. Yeah, where not this slowly unfolding car wreck in slow motion of the fentanyl crisis, as sad and terrible as it is. But his declaration essentially, it does his fentanyl legislation, I should say, does a few things as of right now. The draft we've seen, what was introduced, and that is to essentially ask the Board of Supervisors to let go of their powers of approval on contracts related to solving fentanyl, homelessness, public safety. And that could be anything from, hiring a new nonprofit to administer drug treatment in somewhere, or to line up affordable housing aimed at drug users in the Tenderloin. Things along those lines. The idea being that the board gums up the process, adds 4 to 6 weeks, I think Lurie said at one point, to the process, and this will speed up the response. The other part of the legislation is to allow Lurie for and I should say that sunsets in 2029. The other piece is to allow Lurie for a much shorter period, I think 6 months, to solicit private donations to tackle these same problems. And is this not just Lurie just turning the mayor's office into tipping point 2.0, just saying, I do charities, I do philanthropy, let me just do what I do. And, there's nothing wrong with him bringing his expertise into the mayor's office, but there is a lot of concern around ethics. We just had a huge corruption scandal over the last few years, and so there are obviously questions about what doors that may open.
Right, and you got him on the record around whether this is just a 6-month deal. What
Right.
answer did you get?
Yes, and this was like the one of like 3 or 4 questions he took at the press conference. Very quick, one of the quickest press conferences I've ever seen. And he says, "This is just focused on fentanyl." We got him on the record saying it. This is only for fentanyl. This is only right now. This is temporary, and we'll see if he sticks to it. Because when other problems arise and the budget falls, will he want to go back to philanthropy as a tool?
And it sounds like, too, you got Connie Chan to give you a quote that essentially signaled there might be a little pushback to
Right.
some of this measure, too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think she was signaling concerns about the board abdicating its power, and I think they are in negotiations right now, and we're definitely, I think, going to see a bit of a different proposal. And what's funny is he does have 6 votes for this. He has the support. He could pass this at the earliest opportunity without getting Connie Chan or any of the progressives to say yes. But I don't think he wants to do that. I think he wants to get to 11. There's a lot of politics around that. I think that we can all see.
Right, like some supervisors might not be thrilled about the idea of giving up their authority to oversee contracts.
Right. Then we may see that scaled back. Like instead of sunsetting in 2029, maybe it sunsets in a year or 2 and it can be revisited and renewed. Or maybe the Board of Supervisors can step in if they see something they need to step in on and they don't fully abdicate their authority. Things are approved routinely, but they can pull that back if they need to. Those are some of the things I think are being discussed right now, and I think are like kind of common sense cautionary things, because yes, getting things done quickly makes sense in an emergency, but there's a reason all these checks and balances are in place. We have checks and balances for a reason. Mohamed Nuru didn't have a check and balance on whether or not he could give a $40 million contract out, and all of a sudden he started getting Rolex watches and a tractor and everything, bribes just to hand out a contract to build whatever. I mean, I don't think Lurie necessarily needs someone to buy him a Rolex watch.
Someone does need to buy him a tractor.
Farmer Lurie.
But I wanted to add to your point, because I think it is interesting. So on the campaign trail, he really railed against corruption, and then in the nonprofit space, accountability, all that stuff. And then now he says, okay, but I do want to speed things up and add a certain amount of less checks and balances to the process here. I think he's eventually going to have to square that circle, because those two things appear on the surface to kind of be in conflict with one another. Though, he could give a very convincing argument of, we're going to make this process very transparent. These are the people who we're going to give these contracts to. You can view X, Y, and Z about them. But it just feels like, because I remember looking back a year when actually another emergency declaration was renewed by the city back in March 2024. And Connie Chan brought up this point of I'm concerned about just handing out contracts willy-nilly. And so that's something too that I think he's going to have to figure out.
Yeah.
That remind me of one story I wrote about during the campaign. Daniel Lurie has a housing miracle. That's also accept a lot of private donation to make it happen.
And this was 833
Bryant's,
which is an affordable housing project that
Yeah,
his
so
charity was involved in.
Housing is important. Fentanyl crisis is important, right? So we all need money. So they might open the door to a lot of other issues, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what is the vision here? So he wants to raise private money to address fentanyl. He wants to streamline contracts and make those much faster. I mean, what is the end game? Like, are we building, we know he wants to build some shelters. I mean, what is this all driving at when it comes to fentanyl?
I think, well, I'll take like maybe a bit of a step back further, is I think he wants to create a city that is very business friendly, that, casts itself as you can, make a lot of money here as a business, you can succeed here, your employees can like walk on the streets and feel quote unquote safe, whatever kind of that means by the standards of those workers. I think that he wants to quickly snap up a lot of interim type shelter that isn't necessarily kind of what you would consider like a managed encampment, but not permanent supportive housing. I think he wants to do actually what Mayor Matt Mahan down in San Jose is doing when it comes to trying to what they see as like filling kind of this like gap in between. And I think like he, to his credit, has said over and over and over again that this fentanyl crisis is something that like needs to be like taken care of and figured out at like it's an emergency. And so I think that's sort of like his broader vision right out the bat. And like we watched that interview he did with CNBC, which was very interesting in how he was definitely like that audience is like business executives that he's speaking to. And I think he really wants to make, San Francisco, this place where businesses can really, come back.
Yeah.
There's two things that's interesting about that I find is, one, it's a bit of a repudiation of the Biden administration in a way, because what they had put forward was the housing first policy that we hear from a lot of drug experts. The idea being you put someone who is suffering addiction and mental health crises in a home first, because you cannot solve any of these problems if you're still living in a tent on a street. Your alcoholism and your mental health is really hard to heal. But cities have often been the leaders and vanguard of new policy that then bubbles up to the federal level. So it's pushing past that policy and saying, look, we can't build housing first quickly enough, easily enough. And he said this on the campaign trail. It takes a lot of money, it takes a lot of time. So that smaller shelter, the kind of in-between housing, the small sites, those might be a great in-between that circles that square. And then on the other hand, what I think is interesting is that drop-off center that he talked about, and police being able to take mentally unwell people to a drop-off center instead of jail, is definitely him trying to listen to, I think, progressives who have a problem with over-policing of mental health crises, of the idea that you should throw drug users in jail as a solution. Because we're seeing, and even Brooke Jenkins admitted a long while back, that this was not working in order to coerce people into treatment. So he doesn't have to listen to progressives on that. The politics right now of the city are so against the fentanyl crisis that he could probably just lock everyone up and everyone would applaud and thank him, even if it didn't work in the long term. But he's actually listening to those voices and he's trying to find a middle ground, which I think is interesting.
Yeah. Well, those were described as police-friendly drop-off centers, which is like, I wasn't not entirely sure what that means. But, but I think the idea is a place that you can take somebody who's having a crisis and kind of stabilize them over a short-term period.
Right.
And we've kind of tried things like that. We have these, sobering centers and stuff, but I guess this would be a little different.
We'll see.
We'll see. And when it comes to shelters, he promised to, was it 1,500? He wants to build or stand up 1,500 shelters in his first 6 months, which is an idea that drew some skepticism from some folks inside City Hall when it was made. Yeah.
So the goal is by July 9th or 8th, I think, 6 months after being sworn in, to have 1,500 what he calls emergency shelter beds propped up and ready to use. It was interesting to me that number wasn't mentioned in his speech, nor was it mentioned kind of in some of the policy papers that were released during the inauguration. So we'll see, where that timeline goes. I think that's still like a big question a lot of people have, for the next 6 months.
And I wonder if you'll count ones that were already in the hopper. I mean, I think last time I checked, there was about 400 shelter beds that were kind of in the pipeline to be deployed from the Breed administration. Does that count towards this 1,500?
Yeah.
Does it matter if Breed
would
got it
help.
rolling? Yeah.
Well, I think one other thing too that's really important to add is that like there's been challenges with these shelter beds. Like our colleague David, the homelessness reporter here, has done stories about the issues going on at these places. There's unfortunately a lot of violence at these places, sometimes like open drug use. So that'll also, I think, be a question that he'll have to kind of answer with building these is how are you going to keep these safe? How are you going to staff them up? Staffing is going to be a whole nother issue. We saw a story yesterday or 2 days ago in Mission Local about nurses being like, where are you gonna, with all these things you're promising, where's the staffing gonna come from? So, I think there's a lot I think they're still trying to figure out on that end.
Yeah. And, to execute a lot of these ideas, he's going to need the board of supervisors to cooperate on some things. Interestingly, we also have a lot of fresh faces on the board of supervisors, so it's really an entirely new dynamic at City Hall this year. What do we think we're going to see in terms of how he works with the board?
I think this is we're seeing that early test right now on the fentanyl legislation. He's in those negotiations with the progressives, which again, he doesn't necessarily need to be into. And I think he's trying to set that tone. He called it a new era of cooperation in his Inauguration Day speech. I think specifically new era. And if he doesn't come out the gate of this fentanyl legislation with an 11-0, we might just see that new era crumble pretty quick. But who knows? The budget will also be a huge test of that. And having to make those hard choices of what nonprofits to fund or not, and which unions to piss off or not, all those people draw on different supervisors for support. So how to maintain those relationships amid that's going to be really tough.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Sorry. I was covering the board presidency election that day, which is right after the inauguration. So both Supervisor Mandelman, who's now President Mandelman, was saying, he's very looking forward to work with Lurie. He wants Lurie to be successful. And Lurie basically said the same thing, right, to the supervisor, like, you all have my commitment to work with you. So that feels like a little honeymoon. Let's give it 4 months, right? And as you said, I do think he probably wants like a unanimous consensus on his first major big legislation, which is the declaration of the fentanyl crisis, right? And that will be like a big reflection of how he can work with different parts of the city's, political fraction, right? And work together, which is the unity that everybody wants for local politics. But still, right? Can he really make that happen?
Easier said than done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think one last just tiny note on the board relationships. There was a tweet that went out, I think it was 2 days ago or 3 days ago, from Jackie Fielder that got like a lot of kind of attention, and also a lot of kind of like trolls and some other people kind of clapping back at her. And it was about her kind of like taking a really strong stance on protecting immigrants in San Francisco. And I think there was a resolution she passed on the board,
Sanctuary
right?
City.
Yeah,
Her first resolution she introduced was to reaffirm the city's commitment to the Sanctuary City ordinance.
Yeah, I think it was it passed 11-0. Like, I'm curious kind of like whether that and kind of Trump coming back will kind of like take the heat a little bit off of Lurie, as like Jackie and some of the other progressives are maybe going to be focusing on those issues, and will maybe it allows Lurie like a little bit of room to like be like, she can't fight him on everything, right? The progressives can't fight him on everything, so are we going to go ahead with this? So I don't know. It'd be interesting to see.
Yeah, but can you imagine? So first off, I mean, we haven't seen him talk about Trump at all. His Inauguration Day speech, no mention of Trump. He just signed $130 million in federal grants to approve them that came from the board and working with the board very quickly. Again, in a hurry because we're all afraid that Trump is going to claw back that money. So get the money now. But he didn't mention Trump in his video talking about that either. He seems to be going out of his way not to say that word. It's like he who must not be named in Harry Potter or something.
Right. Bloody Mary.
Yeah, seriously.
Say the name and he appears. Yeah, I mean, this has been something that we've all been kind of wondering about, is how is he going to deal with Trump? How is he going to respond to antagonism towards the city that might come up? And so far, we really have no idea, I don't think.
Can you imagine if and when Trump says, moves forward on his deportations, and all of a sudden we've got, San Franciscans who we all know and have worked with or been friends with or whoever, and starting being pulled out of their homes by armed ICE agents. And what is Lurie going to do? Is he going to put the cops up against the ICE agents? Is he going to do nothing? What happens to Lurie then when we have all these photos gracing media of all these ICE raids and ICE detentions? What becomes of his reputation with it? Do people go, oh, there's nothing he could do?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he strategically right now is not saying anything because he was not voted in on a mandate to fight Trump, right? And he actually, it was interesting, I think it was a day before his inauguration, I attended a interfaith meeting about that he was the keynote speaker at, and he mentioned at the start of the meeting, hey, we're gonna protect San Francisco values, we're gonna protect these groups of people. Doesn't say the word Trump, but then proceeds to kind of also say but we also kind of need to fix our own house. We need to put our own house in order. And so I think that he doesn't really see much of a benefit to talking about it, and it probably, and that also might be a battle he's going to have to face if these things start happening. The progressives, in San Francisco, and even some people kind of just on the moderate left, are going to be, angry about if he doesn't respond accordingly.
Look, this is a city where we named a sewer after George Bush, so we're used to calling out folks on a national level, so this is just a little different.
Right. But, I mean, what is different this time is that there are specific, Trump hasn't made a direct threat about this, but we know that there's been reporting that, and statements from some Republicans, in the federal government, that they may want to find ways to put conditions on funding. We've seen this in the wildfires. There was a comment made by, was it Mike Johnson? I don't know. I don't remember.
Yeah, but the threat of arrest.
Yes. Just references to the attempt to condition aid on some type of concession from California.
And wasn't there also a threat to that officials who protect Sanctuary City may find themselves under arrest?
Correct. Yeah. And during his first term, Trump also tried to go after sanctuary cities using funding as a cudgel, but they weren't successful. But it sounds like they may try again. And actually, Gabe, you've done a little bit of research about what avenues they may be able to take in terms of withholding funding from the city. Tell us a little bit about what you learned.
Yeah, I mean, I think we heard this threat being mentioned shortly after Trump won, and I don't think there's been a ton of chatter about it more recently. So I don't think it's necessarily something he's promising to do on day one, but it's certainly something people are worrying about. So yeah, referencing back to what you were saying, back during the first Trump administration, he did try to condition federal funding on cities who weren't going to comply with his immigration policies. I think it was actually San Francisco who challenged him in court on this, and they succeeded in stopping that effort. So the folks that I've been speaking to have said that basically the reason why that wasn't successful initially was because the direction came from the executive branch. And what they say is this time around, the administration might try to condition funding, but do it through the legislative branch, Congress. So that's one way they might try to do it. And if that actually does happen, we'd see that sometime around March when budget talks are starting to happen again at the federal level.
Yeah. And this is of local relevance in light of our $867 million budget deficit. And there is some concern that, so it's FEMA still on paper owes us some money from the COVID emergency that we haven't gotten yet. And there is some concern that we may not get that money if
That's right.
Trump interferes.
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah. A huge chunk of money spent during the pandemic on all sorts of things, including like the hotels where we sheltered homeless folks when the pandemic was at its worst. So the city spent that money with the idea that the federal government was going to pay it back, and that's a pretty big threat right now to our coffers in a time when our coffers are already bare because of downtown's implosion and the lack of tax base.
Yeah. So this is something that could have a very direct detrimental impact on our budget situation. So
it could threaten all these policy initiatives: fentanyl, public safety, affordable housing.
Yeah. Well, we do have the mayor on CNBC. We watched that bit the other night. We know he wants very much for businesses to return to the city, and that would, if he is successful, that could help our tax revenue situation. But
I feel bad I missed it. Did they do any Gonzo Kramer things? Did they ring the bell? Or did they,
No
it
bell
was a pretty
ringing.
subdued interview, for Jim Kramer. But
that's no fun.
yeah, I mean, he actually mentioned that he had met with Jamie Dimon, the CEO of J.P. Morgan Chase, and an executive from Blackstone.
He was about to go meet with
Yes. Yeah. With the, sending the message like, we are open for business. Please come back and, locate in our city again.
Diamond was apparently singing his praises when Lurie gave that opening remarks to that conference.
All right, so we've got a few minutes left. What are each of you watching in the next few weeks?
I would, because as we know, right, Daniel Lurie has no track record in politics, and of course, we don't know his politics during the campaign that much, right? So I think it would be telling to see who he appoint, like police commissioner, MTA commissioner, to kind of have a sense, who he would prefer to put in those powerful positions, and tell, is he more of an urbanist, or more of a pro-car, or like pro-cop, or more of a progressive reformist, right? So that would be something very telling to see.
Yeah, I think three things. I think one, how the unions react in the next couple of weeks to this hiring freeze, and it sounds like there's an eventual response that's brewing, that's going to come about. I think second, Trump gets into office on Monday, I believe it is, and
Tuesday.
It's on Tuesday, and I wouldn't be surprised within the first 4 or 5 days if some really big, thing he tries to pass, something that affects liberal cities happens, and what is his first kind of reaction going to be to that? And then I would also say kind of where this, these 1,500 shelter beds and the idea around that, where are the details around that? Those are the three things.
Yeah. For me, it's his relationship with the Board of Supervisors, because that's the roadblock that he will have to getting all these policy initiatives done. Yes, it's about the policies, but it's also about the relationships. Can he maintain those? Is it still the honeymoon period, or does that glow go away quickly and he finds himself smack dab face to face with political reality? We don't know. Maybe it is a new era. That would be interesting. Mm-hmm. Also, fun fact, I was hearing that he was giving his phone number out to constituents and just texting them back and being like, hey, what's your problem? What's going on? You need help? And talking directly to them. How long can he keep that pace up? I'd be interested to know.
And will he text us?
Yeah. Will he text us? Yeah. We're constituents. I live just south of the Excelsior in the Outer Mission. Come on now. Help me with the tree in front of my spot. Thing's dangerous.
Yeah. You think we'll see more department heads showing themselves the door? Or being shown the door?
I believe so, right?
Yeah, we've definitely heard of at least one who's on the verge of retirement and who's, looking to walk right out. And, that would give Mayor Lurie, pardon me, the ability to reshape his administration. Also, I love the little bit of not very subtle shade that the Bay Area Reporter was throwing Mayor Lurie, where they're like, hey, and Bay Area Reporter, for all who don't know, is like one of the local LGBTQ papers, and very, very good about calling out, who is out and gay and who is, representing that. And they're like, Daniel Lurie saw 2 gay department heads leave. Will he appoint someone from the community to take their place? Not very subtle. Bay Area Reporter, it was great.
Yeah, I'm going to be looking forward to Lunar New Year week, the Lunar New Year parade, which is also going to be the weekend of the NBA All-Star Game.
Wow.
So that's going to be a really fun, really crazy weekend in the city, but it's also going to be like a huge moment for Daniel Lurie because he is the honorary?
He's the honorary Grand Marshal of the parade. Yeah.
Yeah.
Whoa! Is he gonna be at the DJ booth? Is he gonna be saying stuff?
Probably both. He's going to be in the parade and probably will be at a VIP stand. Yeah.
Can you imagine Daniel Lurie throwing some Rose Pack style shade? Be like, there goes Scott Wiener. He doesn't support any of my stuff. Like as he drives by.
No more firecrackers though.
No.
Hold off on firecrackers.
Yeah, exactly. Probably won't be holding any matches anytime soon.
Yeah.
Google it, people.
Right. Yeah. So I think that's going to be a fun weekend. And it's going to be a big moment for him because he'll get to be sort of a guest of honor at the parade and sort of revel in the glory and the economic benefits of 2 of those major events happening in the same weekend.
Yeah, and he prioritized Chinatown a lot, right? As we can see, inauguration night events and also Chinatown parade for sure. He would not miss that.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, any final thoughts?
Go fill up that mug with coffee.
Oh, yeah.
Well, we need scoops, right?
Yeah. Please reach out to us.
Yeah, please. All right. Well, thanks everybody so much for tuning in. If you want more of our reporting, please check out sfstandard.com and sign up for a membership if you haven't done so already. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you all soon.